Hello, I'm Nafisa Latic, and this is Across the Balkans. This week, we look into the British monarchy's relations with the Balkans following the death of Queen Elizabeth. Before ascending to the throne, then Prince Charles visited the region several times and is very well known among the people there. He was supposed to arrive with his wife Camilla to Bosnia in March last year, but the trip was cancelled because of the COVID-19 pandemic. One of his first visits to the Balkans was to the former state of Yugoslavia. Back in 1978, he landed at Dubrovnik airport and went to Montenegro to meet the late Yugoslavian president Josip Broz Tito. As the Prince of Wales, Charles also visited Bosnia during the war in 1993 to meet with British troops stationed there. In 1996, he condemned the mindless destruction of people's lives and historical monuments and visited the war-torn Bosnian National Library in Sarajevo. He said he wanted personally to see the scale of destruction of that significant monument. A couple of years later, he came to the opening of the old bridge in Mostar, also destroyed during the war in Bosnia. My guest today is Marko Attila Hoare, who is a Balkan historian and associate professor at Sarajevo School of Science and Technology. He joins us from London. Marko, great to have you with us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Now, I've mentioned just briefly several visits that King Charles, previously Prince of Wales, had in the region. He visited the region on several occasions. So what do you make of his relations with the Balkans so far?
He certainly has he certainly suggests that he has a particular interest in the region. He has been to Bosnia now several times. He was there in 1996, shortly after the war, again in 2004, and in 2016 he was visiting Croatia, Serbia, Montenegro, and Kosovo. He has a certain interest. Of course, he's as a member of the royal family, he can't really express very clear views, but he does seem to have a sympathy, and he does seem to have an understanding for the genocide that happened and for the immense human and material destruction that took place. I know, for example, he visited my college in Cambridge when I was a student and spoke to a Bosnian friend of mine and told her how horrified he was in 1993, this is, of the destruction of these beautiful buildings of the Ottoman era and so forth. So this destruction and genocide that took place in Bosnia in the 1990s certainly moved him.
Right. We looked back at a couple of his previous visits, and what stood out for me was his visit to the National Library in Sarajevo after it was burned to ground during the war. How significant was it back then to have then Prince of Wales, extremely popular back then, condemning the atrocities in Bosnia and sending a message from Vijećnica, from Sarajevo City Hall?
Well, it was certainly a big deal. I mean, the point was that Britain did not play a very good role in the Bosnian War. Britain was the country probably most responsible among the big powers for the international community's failure to stop the genocide in the 1990s. So the fact that Prince Charles visited the country just after the war ended did send a certain signal there. Of course, he was also visiting British peacekeeping troops there, but nevertheless, it kind of sent a signal of human sympathy that had been lacking in British official policy during the war.
Right, Marko, very significant was back then to see Prince Charles, Prince of Wales, visiting Bosnia in the 90s. Now, what kind of an outlook can we expect for him to have towards the region as king? Does this mean we will see him less here in the future, and how will his role change moving forward?
Well, of course, he's king now, so he won't have quite the same freedom to go on foreign excursions as he had as prince. But it does make a difference, the fact that you have the new monarch actually having this kind of past history of engagement with the region. So obviously he does not have very great policy-making powers. He's a constitutional monarch, so he doesn't actually dictate, obviously, government policy. But nevertheless, he can talk to senior policymakers, ministers, and others, and perhaps steer Britain in a kind of correct direction slightly. You can perhaps put in a few good words for Bosnia and for other countries in the region. Britain has, since 1997, since Tony Blair became Prime Minister, Britain has actually changed its policy and become one of Bosnia's biggest friends in the West, and perhaps most pro-Bosnian of any of the major Western powers. And we expect this to continue, this kind of policy of support for Bosnia and for reconstruction of the region.
And how can Bosnia use this fact that the current king has so much knowledge of its past history and the events that took place in the 90s in the future? You said, yes, this relationship between the UK and the Balkans in general has changed recently.
Well, Bosnia is going through a sort of a major kind of crisis now with this challenge of the OHR's attempt to impose a new electoral law, the challenge of the Croat nationalists, and continued obstruction from the Serb nationalists in Republika Srpska. Britain remains sympathetic. However, Britain is also wedded to the Dayton Agreement that kind of prevents Bosnia really moving forward. But the fact that you have an establishment, including a monarch, who are sympathetic to Bosnia, to the country, means that if there is any kind of possibility of a policy change that would help to reconstruct Bosnia more in the years ahead, that Britain is likely to be at the head of it. So Britain is not very enthusiastic about the OHR's attempt to change the electoral law to the benefit of the Croat nationalists. Perhaps more of a dissenter than the Biden administration in Washington. So we can perhaps hope that within a sort of a framework of Western policy, Britain will be one of those who will play a more positive role.
Could we expect to see Prince William, who is the new Prince of Wales, to continue in some way this engagement with the Balkans his father had in the past?
I think that's entirely likely. Of course, we don't know exactly how he'll be in his new role. He's a new element in the equation. But given the kind of role his father played, you might very well see him playing a similar role, given that Britain has shown his particular interest in the Balkans. And I would also say that following Brexit, the Balkans is one area in which Britain continues to seek to play a kind of prominent role to kind of reaffirm its role on the world stage following its withdrawal from the European Union. So you're very likely to see someone like Prince William, for example, going and making similar trips to kind of strengthen Britain's position as a leading engager in the Balkans.
The Bosnian Foreign Minister Bisera Turkovic invited King Charles again to visit Bosnia, especially now during this political crisis as the country is heading towards the election. Can we expect this to happen anytime soon in the future?
I wouldn't like to say. The point is he's going to have a lot of things on his plate. He's going to be a very busy man, assuming the role of monarch now. So it may be that this won't be the highest priority for him, but I think he will be sympathetic to the invitation and will want to continue the engagement. So we can see, if not a royal visit, nevertheless continued engagement of Britain with the region.
Obviously, we mentioned several times how significant for the Balkans is this connection with the UK. But what about how significant for the UK is the Balkans?
I think it is significant. As I said, Britain wants to continue to play a prominent role on the world stage, but the withdrawal from the European Union has, in a sense, confined it to other areas. So support for the Balkan countries is one way in which Britain can reaffirm its importance as an international factor. Britain remains very much committed to NATO, and this is an area of security concern, what with Russian activities, destabilization, and a pro-Russian regime in Serbia that also doesn't really accept the status quo. So as a major NATO power outside the European Union, Britain can hope to play and will hope to play a major role in any developments in the Balkans.
Marco, thank you so much for your insight for us. Marco Atlahoare, their Balkan historian, joining us from London. We are switching to Albania's relations with Iran and what role the US might be playing in a diplomatic spat that erupted recently. Earlier this month, Albania cut diplomatic ties with Iran and expelled its diplomats following a cyber attack in July, which it blamed on Tehran. The US concluded Iran was behind the cyber attack following weeks of investigation. Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama has called it a state aggression. Tehran denies any involvement, saying Albania's claims are baseless. US President Joe Biden has supported Tirana's move and called for Tehran to be held accountable. Now, Albania and Iran's relations have been tense since 2014, when Tirana accepted 3,000 members from the Mujahideen al-Halq, or the MEK for short, which Tehran labels a terrorist group. They have settled in a camp near Durrës, Albania's main port. The MEK frequently hosts summits in Albania with support from US Republicans, such as former Vice President Mike Pence. And the latest incident isn't the first between the two countries. In 2018 and 2020, relations took a hit after Tirana expelled 4 Iranian diplomats for threatening national security.
This extreme response, not at all desirable, but entirely necessary, is entirely proportionate to the severity of the cyber attack that threatened to paralyze public services, wipe out digital systems, hack into state data, steal electronic communications from within the government system, and spread insecurity and chaos across the country.
The Islamic Republic of Iran strongly rejects these allegations and advises the Albanian government not to sacrifice its national interest for political motives and interest of the American government, the Zionist regime, and others.
Meanwhile, Bosnia and Herzegovina has also recently reported a record number of cyber attacks. The State Intelligence and Security Agency has called on all private and public institutions to perform a security assessment of their information and communication systems and take the necessary measures to guard against future intrusions. In May, NATO officials warned that Russia could try to attack the digital infrastructure of Bosnia and Georgia. NATO also said it's stepping up its support for the two countries to strengthen their defense capabilities, including against cyber warfare. Bosnia doesn't yet have a state-level cybersecurity strategy, and elsewhere in the Balkans, states like North Macedonia have come up with plans to tackle the threat of cyber terrorism, as attacks in recent years have seen a steady rise, with many going unresolved. To get more on this topic, let's bring in Balkan Affairs analyst Akri Chipa. He is in New York. Akri, great to have you with us on Across the Balkans.
Thank you for having me.
Now, why would Tehran carry out these cyber attacks and worsen its relations with Albania?
Well, the big problem that Iran has with Albania is the fact that Albania hosts the People's Mujahideen of Iran, which is a resistance group that the Iranian government accuses as a terrorist one. Albania has been hosting the group since 2013, and it elevated the number of the group members in the country in 2016.
But why? Why is Albania hosting this group, and how influential are they in Albania at the moment?
Well, the request came from the United States, a strategic ally for Albania, and the Albanian government in 2013, led by then Prime Minister Sali Berisha, and in 2016 by Prime Minister Rama. So there was bipartisan support. They both agreed and decided to host the members of the MEC. The relocation in Albania was made through the United Nations Commission on Refugees with the support of the UNHCR. And unfortunately, Iran never forgave Albania for hosting the group. And the problem is that while they are not integrated in Albanian society, they live in a camp about 30 miles west of Tirana, the capital. The government in Tehran sees them as a terrorist group. They still see them as a security threat for the country. And they decided in this specific case to attack Albania through cyber attacks in order to disrupt its services as a sort of retaliation for what we saw earlier this year in a set of concerted attacks against its cyberspace, which was considered by the government in Iran as coming from MEC, which resides in Albania.
What do we know about the activities of MEC in Albania as of recently?
Well, as I said, they're not integrated in Albanian society. They live in this camp about 30 miles west of Tirana. It's called Ashraf 3, where they were relocated after several threats that they faced from Iranian activists in Albania. The main item that they do in their yearly agenda is this annual forum, the Pre-Iran Summit, World Summit, in which they invite different Albanian representatives, of course, but also many international leaders come to these forums, especially from the United States, including heavyweights like former Vice President Mike Pence, Secretary Pompeo, Mayor Giuliani, as we saw in your video. So there is this kind of activity that they do in this event that was previously hosted in France and most recently in Albania. It's worth reminding that in July, just 1 week before the cyber attack, actually, there was this expectation for the summit to be held again. And the decision was to cancel it after the Albanian security forces raised the alarm that there was the chance of a terrorist attack against the activity. And due to the fact that Albania does not have the necessary capacities to deal with such a critical threat that might be posed from Iran, they decided to cancel the summit and to reschedule it later in the year, although the date has not been specified yet.
Right. Edi Rama, the Albanian Prime Minister, said no data has been shared with the hackers, and the message that they've put was, we performed the attacks to express our hatred towards the Albanian government. So what happens now? What happens next? How will Albania protect itself from the future cyber attacks?
So basically, the attack was made to be seen as it was coming from Albanian citizens that were fed up with the fact that Albania was hosting the group, in the country, which cannot be true because there is no sentiment against the group. As I said, Albanians don't really know about the operations of the group. They're very secluded in their camp, so there is no interaction at all. There is no no sentiments against the group at all within the Albanian population. And from the investigation that was done by Albania in cooperation with American partners, including also private partners like Microsoft, it was clearly established that the Iranian government sponsored the cyber attack in July, and also the following attack against the TIMS system. After Albania decided to cut ties with Iran, there was another attack against the total information management system, which basically highlights the border crossings and whether suspicious wanted criminals or suspected terrorists try to cross the border, whether to enter Albania or whether to leave the country. And the attack disrupted the service again, and it was done, I believe, and from what the government of Albania stated, in retaliation to a decision to cut diplomatic relations.
Right.
From the Albanian standpoint, it's important to deflate the tensions right now. It's clear that the decision of Tehran was not proportional. The cyber attack was not proportional, considering that Albania in itself is not involved in the activities of the MEK group, of the Mujahideen group. Clearly, there was this sort of understanding from Tehran that they were aiding the group directly, which is not true. And it seems that it falls within this pattern of Iran trying to attack every country that it sees as an ally or in direct cooperation with the United States on a set of issues that it considers threatening to its regime in Tehran.
Right. Can Iran and Albania fix their relations anytime soon after this spat? And give us more background about the US and Albania strategic partnership.
So now it's difficult. Usually the decision to cut diplomatic ties is a last resort, because it's good to keep those channels of communications open and dialogue open. With the decision to cut ties, it's clear that Albania saw no benefit in having even a small diplomatic compound in Albania from Iran. And moreover, it saw as a threat to the security of the country and the security of its citizens. It's worth remembering that in 2018, actually, Albania declared non grata the Iranian ambassador and another diplomat at the embassy, because an alleged terrorist plot in which the two high officials participated. Although the attack was not specified, they were declared non grata and asked to leave the country at the time. And there have been other instances in which Iranian citizens have been seen as tied to the Iranian security apparatus and as clear threats to the security, not only of the People's Mujahideen of Iran, but also to Albanian citizens. Another activity that has been very destabilizing from Iran has been the effort to take control of the Bektashi order, which is the headquarters of which is located in Albania. And actually, there were security threats to the head father, Haji Ded Edmond Brahimaj, the world leader of the Bektashi order. Physical security threats that have recently resurfaced and have been discussed largely in the media recently. So there were this whole set of activities that Iran was doing, usually through the support of its embassy or through the diplomats, so-called diplomats, usually tied to the security services in the country. And therefore, the decision to cut ties was seen as a way to preserve security, not only to respond politically and diplomatically to the attack.
Right, a strong response from the Albanian government to those cyber attacks. Akri, just briefly at the end, we have seen an increased number of cyber attacks in the Balkans in the wake of the war in Ukraine. Why is this happening?
I think that in many cases it's also why Iran decided to conduct the cyber attack against Albania. I think that it served as a litmus test against a NATO member to see, first of all, the level of security in this country, but also the kind of response that it would get from other allies of Albania, whether within NATO or whether closely associated with it, as the European Union is, for instance. In this case, I think that you are right. We've seen this increase in cyber attacks, not only in Albania, but we've seen that in Montenegro, we've seen that in Kosovo, we've seen that in North Macedonia. And it's very troubling because all these countries lack the necessary capabilities to counter the attacks, whether in terms of expertise and manpower or whether in terms of resources. It's clear that there need to be much more support from the Western countries, especially the United States and Germany, France also, UK, in order to be able to safeguard their systems, which, because at the very end, it poses a security threat also for NATO systems more broadly. Lastly, it's also a way to show that there is unfortunately no protocol yet, no mechanism with which NATO deals with such attacks, cyber attacks. There were some discussions about whether this would constitute like an Article 5 type of infringement against a member state. The discussion was very vague, unfortunately, because there has been no decision making.
Right, lots of work to be done in the Balkans to protect itself from the future cyber attacks. Unfortunately, I don't have any more time. Akri, great to have you with us. Great insight. Thank you so much. The first eco-friendly mosque in the region has opened in Sisak. The Croatian town was once a battleground between the Ottoman and Habsburg empires, but it's now a symbol of unity and tolerance. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan inaugurated an Islamic cultural center and the mosque during his Balkan tour earlier this month. President Erdogan said the mosque is an example of the freedom, respect and peace provided to Muslims in Europe. Here is a sneak peek of the new mosque that is expected to serve more than 4,000 worshippers.
Hırvatistan, Müslümanlara sağlanan özgürlük, saygı ve huzur ortamı bakımından Avrupa'da örnek gösterilen ülkeler arasındadır. Esselamu aleyküm ve rahmetullahi ve berekatuhu.
U gradu Sisku, gdje su se prije mnogo stoljeća ukrštali putevi i mačevi velikih svjetskih sila, religija, kršćanstva i islama, danas vlada mir, prijateljstvo i danas otvaramo jedan spomenik kulture, spomenik modernosti, spomenik islamskoj zajednici i modernoj Hrvatskoj, zemlji otvorenoj, demokratskoj, otvoreno za sve ljude dobre volje, svih vjera i svih zdravih svjetonazora.
Puno znači, baš sam ponosna jer imamo mi u Zagrebu jako lijepi islamski centar i sad me baš raduje što je ovaj isto tako lijep, prekrasan. Možemo se družiti između gradova, oni nama dolazi u posjete, mi njima i za ovaj narod to puno znači ovdje u Sisku.
Evet, bu anı çok bekliyorduk.
That's it for this week. Thanks for watching Across the Balkans. See you next time. And for me and the whole team here in Istanbul, bye-bye for now.